Thanks, Jeff. I want to congratulate you and the Afghan-American Chamber of Commerce. I think you pulled this together in record time, so I really want to congratulate, I want to thank the U.S. Chamber for also, what a great space. This is a really fabulous space. And I think it's great that your sponsors have chosen to support this. I think this is a great conference, and I think a great idea. I want to make 3 points, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel. I think the first is that there's a lot more economic and social progress. If you take the 2000, if you go from 2000 to today, if you look at the amount of cell phones in the year 1999, I think there were 50,000 cell phones in Afghanistan. Today, someone can tell me the number of cell phones, if it's, I don't know if it's 5 million or if it's 6 million, but there's like, you know, massive coverage. If you look at the number of, 20 million? Okay, 7 million. So from 50,000 under the Taliban to 7 million. 17, sorry, I'm getting old in my hearing, so 17 million. If you look at the number of girls in school, the number was the grand total of 0, if I'm not mistaken, in the year 1999. It depends on the day, it depends on the province, but is it 2 million, 2.2 million girls in school today? If you look at health metrics in Afghanistan from the year 1999 today, there have been some land speed records made in terms of progress, starting from a low base on certain sorts of health metrics that that people watch in terms of whether there's like a capable society or sort of human development metrics. Look at the number of the amount of kilometers of roads paved, the Loya Jirgas, the Purple Finger elections. So metric after metric. So I know there's lots of challenges, but I think it's always important to understand we're doing this in the context of a lot of progress. And I think long-term partners like the Afghan-American Chamber of Commerce have taken the long view and are in this for the long haul. Okay, so at the same time, we're having this conference, I think, in the run-up to the October Brussels conference. And so I think there's going to be a decision point made, and I think the ambassador's remarks is about, okay, well, we still are going to have a role to play. The Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, the U.S. government, there's still going to be an ask on the non-kinetic, on the non-military side. There's going to be a security ask, and there's going to be an economic ask. There are a lot of gains that have been made in the last 15 years, and we're going to still have to continue to be there for a long period of time, but we shouldn't operate as if we are not throwing money away. So I think that's the point here. We are not throwing money away. There is a significant amount of progress. Okay. So I put a couple of points to this panel, and then I'm going to shut up, which was, I want us to think about what are some opportunities, because I think a lot of people in this audience are thinking about opportunities, and what can we hope to see in terms of economic and social progress under the following conditions, because I think the United States at Brussels is going to be thinking about a 3 to 5 year time horizon. What can you expect if you're a donor or you're a stakeholder in the success of Afghanistan, holding a couple of things constant? You have the current government stays together, the security situation, not perfect, but more or less stays the same, marginally improves or marginally gets a little worse, but it's not catastrophically worse. The economy more or less muddles through. What can you expect under sort of a series of those? And let's assume that we're not going to get peace in our time with the bad guys anytime in the next 3 to 5 years, at least sort of a complete peace deal. So under those constraints, what could you hope for? So if in your presentations you don't answer those questions, that's my one question to all of you. Could you say one business opportunity and one thing you can hope for in terms of holding those things constant, which I think are reasonable assumptions? Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to start with Tommaso, who's with the World Bank and is part of the team that's been looking at the conversation around doing business. So if you know what doing business is, this is the force ranking. If Jeffrey and I wanted to open up a Cadillac dealership in Kabul, we're not going to open a Cadillac, but maybe a Toyota pickup truck dealership in Kabul. How many steps would it take to be part of the formal economy? So we paid taxes and paid everything. And the force ranking of the doing business indicators has been one of the most powerful things that the World Bank does. Not the checks they cut, but the naming and shaming. I know the World Bank doesn't like saying that, but I will say it. The naming and shaming of bad actors and say, hey, you better, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get right, because your neighbors to the east or to the west are 50 rankings ahead of you, and it forces constructive change. So he's part of that team. So go ahead, Tommaso.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So in this session, I would like to illustrate what the Doing Business report by the World Bank tells us about Afghanistan. And I would also like to introduce a subnational Doing Business report that the World Bank is currently implementing. So first of all, a few words about the Doing Business report. It's an annual report that measures and ranks 189 economies based on the ease of their business regulations. Doing Business looks at the regulatory obstacles to firms. It doesn't look at other aspects of the business environment that are equally important, such as the macroeconomic stability, the diffusion of corruption, and the obstacles posed by security issues. So it's important when reading the rankings to bear in mind the focus and the limits of doing business. Each economy is measured, like the biggest business city of each economy is taken into consideration by the ranking. So for Afghanistan, it's Kabul. We can move, yes, please. So we can see the rankings for Afghanistan. Yeah, next slide. Okay, thank you. So Afghanistan is currently ranked 177th out of the 189 countries, so there is clearly room for improvement.
Yeah, clearly room for improvement.
Yeah,
right.
Especially in some areas, as we can see, such as protecting minority investors, dealing with construction permits, registering properties. There are also some good news, especially in some of the topics that we measured. There has been reform in the recent years, for example, in the area of starting a business. The process of starting up a company was moved from the commercial course to a specialized agency, and a one-stop shop was created, so now it's possible to make the company registration, the tax registration, and the publication in the official gazette all in one step, which is considered a good practice at the global level. Also in the getting credit area, there has been reforms. The latest one was the creation of a credit registry to improve the the access to credit information. In order to promote more reforms, the World Bank is currently doing a subnational assessment of doing business, expanding the measurements beyond Kabul. Other 4 major cities are being measured in 4 areas that we identified together with the government. These are the areas where we are more likely to find subnational differences. The objective is creating a baseline for these additional cities in order to be able to compare them within themselves and with the other cities measured at by doing business at the global level, to identify bottlenecks in these areas and to provide reform advisories. This is the first round of subnational doing business in Afghanistan. There will be another one to measure reforms. The first round is due by end of 2016, so I don't have final result to share today, but
you can come back next year and share them with us.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. I just wanted to mention a couple of preliminary findings that might be interesting for the discussion this morning. On one side, we noticed that some of the reforms got stuck in Kabul. They focused more on the capital and less on the other provinces. And we believe it's time now to move the reform efforts also in the other cities, especially the big one where we see that the private sector is vibrant and need to be assisted by smart regulations. On the other side, we also found good practices that are in place in other cities and not in Kabul, despite Afghanistan being very centralized. Some cities could implement solutions that can be a lesson also for the other cities. Much easier, it's important to identify local good practices because it's much easier to replicate them when you share the same cultural, social, and economical background than replicating global good practices that are in place in very different contexts. An example is the construction permits area, where other municipalities developed strategies to be quicker and more efficient than in the capital. And to mention just one last example, there is a pilot project going on in Herat, where the process of transferring property will be moved from the judicial power to the land registry, Eurasia. And this is an interesting project to follow because, as I was saying, registering property is actually one of the areas where improvement is needed. With this,
Great.
I will leave the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you for modeling short and concise. That's great. Thank you. Let me just say two things. At the Brussels conference, there's going to be an ask of the international community. I don't know the exact numbers, but it'll be around $1 billion or $1 billion plus for the United States, $1 billion or $1 billion plus from Europe and other OECD donors, and others would be sort of another $1 billion. So the World Bank does about $200 million a year in IDA, which is their low budget grant monies that pays for things like this, as well as they get money from the US and other bilateral donors in something called the Afghan-American, the Afghan Trust Fund for Reconstruction, and that's about $700 million a year. So Afghanistan's a big check writer out of its own budget and through the budgets of the United States to fund things like this. Obviously, it's not, that this is much more of a policy thing than sort of, huge outlays of money, but it's very important in the sorts of reforms. And the other thing is, on things like the investment climate in a place like Afghanistan, there was a study I saw a couple of years ago where businesses in the formal economies were saying in surveys they could handle the security issues, they could mitigate and manage security risk. What they wanted was clear rules of the game and stronger rule of laws. So the sorts of things that Tommaso's talking about is very much moving things in the direction of clear rules of the game. Okay, Eleanor, nice to see you.
See you. All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dan and Jeff, for inviting me to be on the panel. As Jeff mentioned in his introduction, I work with USAID's Development Credit Authority. It's our agency's loan guarantee, partial credit guarantee tool. So I'll talk about that, but I'll spend a few minutes first talking about what USAID is doing in general in Afghanistan. We'll get to the slides in a second. USAID, by way of background, probably most of you are quite familiar with us, but we are the US government's donor agency. We have a $20 billion annual budget. In Afghanistan, of all our 80-plus countries abroad, Afghanistan is our largest budget, largest country office in the world. So we're spending just over $800 million there annually. We have an office of over 300 people. We are generally supporting sort of our traditional sectors, so health, education, infrastructure, democracy and governance, and then economic growth, which is what I'll focus on a little bit here. Our economic growth budget is quite focused on sort of broad-based economic growth, especially in the agriculture sector. We spend over $300 million a year on our programs there, focused on two main interventions. And it's actually quite appropriate. I'm speaking right after Tommaso. One of our main interventions is on the enabling environment for businesses. So we look a lot at enhanced trade, job creation through these programs. We have focused a lot on WTO accession, customs reforms, and building institutional capacity. Our other main intervention is on helping businesses access financing and helping businesses grow. So this is really where the DCA partial credit guarantee comes in, which I'll talk about in a second. But we have one program specifically focused on matching businesses with financing. Through that, we're helping businesses connect to markets, learn new skills. We're especially looking at women-owned businesses. And we're focused quite a bit on public-private alliances through that program. So to date, we have formed almost over 350 public-private alliances. We've leveraged 180 million in investments and have 40 initiatives that provide alternative workplace models for women specifically. So the other tool that really I focus on is the Development Credit Authority. Let's see. There we go. So the Development Credit Authority, or DCA, is the agency's loan guarantee tool. The agency is typically a technical assistance provider. This is our one commercial tool, I would say, since we don't make direct debt investments ourselves, we don't do equity, but we provide partial credit guarantees, typically with local financial institutions. So I'll talk about what we're doing in Afghanistan in a minute. But the whole goal is to leverage or to mobilize untapped liquidity that exists in the banking sector or in the financial sector in the countries in which we work. So just traditionally, we've seen that so many banks in the countries we work take in deposits and don't lend them back out to the private sector. I mean, to me, it's shocking, especially in Afghanistan. Banks are lending less than 20% of what they take in deposits. I think some banks are barely lending at all. Probably a lot of you are much more familiar with this concept than I am. But banks are basically taking in deposits and investing in capital notes issued by the government or investing in banks abroad. So really the idea is to get the banks through the risk-sharing mechanism of the US government to lend the money back out to viable businesses. Another shocking statistic to me on Afghanistan, which I think Dan wanted us to talk about, opportunity, but huge opportunity exists here because of this untapped liquidity, and also just the fact that private credit as a percent of GDP in Afghanistan is less than 1%. Whereas if you look at the United States, I mean, admittedly, this might be too high, but it's over 200%. So there's huge room for growth there. So this, again, in our office, we're not unfamiliar with this concept of how risk-averse banks and other private financial players are, but in Afghanistan, it's especially stark. So we're trying to change this strong risk aversion through the Development Credit Authority loan guarantee. So here, just a few little piece of information on how it works. It's typically a 50% risk-sharing guarantee with a private lender. It's backed by the U.S. Treasury, so while we as USAID administer it, it's a U.S. government AAA-rated guarantee. We partner with all different types of financial institutions. So Dan told us we were very limited in the number of slides we could have, but I wanted to put this one up just to show just the variety of types of lenders and borrowers we're working with. Jeff, when he introduced me, said we're working with SMEs. In Afghanistan, we are currently, but we're not limited to SMEs by any means. And we're barely limited by sector. In fact, USAID, every country has its own strategy. As I mentioned, in Afghanistan, we're specifically focused on things such as infrastructure, so we could support an infrastructure project through the guarantee. We're seeing in the region a huge focus on power and renewable energy, so we're looking at projects like that, as well as SMEs across health, education, and other priority sectors for us. I also wanted to just highlight the types of lenders we're working with. So Afghanistan does have a growing banking sector, so that's where we're working currently, but also a growing microfinance sector. So we're partnering with several microfinance institutions in Afghanistan currently. So since just a quick overview, DCA started in 1999, even though USAID started back in the 60s. But since then, we have signed 474 DCA guarantees, leveraging $3.9 billion in credit worldwide. Yeah, and that's across 75 countries. Afghanistan, I would say, is one of the countries with the most room for growth, and I'll talk about that in a second. We've signed 2 guarantees in Afghanistan. The one I'm going to talk about today is our 2013 guarantee with AIB, Afghan International Bank, and this is specifically for the SME sector, so we're sharing the risk 50% on principal with AIB on loans to SMEs, and no other restrictions. So AIB, as our partner, goes out, finds borrowers to lend to, and makes the loans. And if there's a default on the back end, we come in and pay AIB 50% of their loss on principal. So this is just one example of what we can do. To date, we have seen, especially recently, a lot of success under this guarantee. About $3 million has been lent out under it. This is one example. We're doing it on a portfolio basis here. We can also do it on a single lender-borrower basis. One of the reasons I like presenting in forums like this is because it helps us generate ideas for how we can support certain beneficiaries in Afghanistan, and then also what types of different lenders will come to us. So I think another on the opportunity side, Dan, just to make you happy, we've recently seen increasing interest from banks in Afghanistan, and I don't know if it has to do with the risk profile or what's happening in the enabling environment these days, but recently 3 new banks have come to us to partner with us, which we're very
It's
happy
probably
about.
the success of the Doing Business program at the World
Exactly.
Bank is
Yes.
creating a better enabling environment. That's why they're coming
That's
to you.
right. So please, I'm hoping that during, at the end of
Yeah.
this, I'll be able to discuss more one-on-one with people some of the opportunities here in Afghanistan, specifically on both the beneficiary side, so the borrower side, and the lender side. So thank you
Okay,
very much.
So Eleanor, if I had a solar panel program and I need to borrow money, or I had a water project idea, would I call you? Who would I call if I had a specific project in mind for Afghanistan?
I'm glad you asked. So actually, one thing I want to mention is that my office in Washington is the technical office that helps administer the guarantees, but all of the decisions are driven out of our local office in Kabul.
Kabul, yeah.
So you would call Kabul, and they would
Okay.
call me.
Okay. But you could help us get to Kabul if you wanted.
Yes.
We want to talk. Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, Craig, thanks for being here. You've been working on Afghanistan for a long time in various lives. You're currently the DC representative for the Asian Development Bank. But you've been following and working on Afghan issues for more than 10 years, so you actually have a long history with the country. And the Asian Development Bank, I think, is well recognized in the U.S. For its work on infrastructure projects, especially 5 or 7 or 8 years ago in particular. People have a very positive impression of a number of projects ADB has done, so thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Jeff, and the AACC for inviting me to join you today. It's especially nice to see some good friends I haven't seen for a while in the audience. Dan asked me to say a few words about ADB's program in Afghanistan, and so bear with me for just a second. Since we resumed our program in Afghanistan in 2001, we've become the largest on-budget provider of infrastructure. As of March 31st, our portfolio investment in the country comprises 24 projects, totaling $2.9 billion, financed from loans, grants, and co-financing and trust funds. We have 9 projects in the transport sector, 8 in energy, and 7 in agriculture and natural resources. We've focused since 2002 on these 3 sectors, largely at Ashraf Ghani's urging. I should say that within these 3 sectors, there's an even greater focus on roads and electricity and water management. And it served us pretty well. I think it served Afghanistan well to date. It's allowed us to focus in a way that would have been difficult otherwise. We're investing in both hard infrastructure through roads and rail, transmission lines, power substations, and distribution networks, as well as irrigation canals and water diversion structures. We're also investing in soft infrastructure. This includes capacity building and strategic planning for infrastructure development. Moving forward, we recently approved an exceptional grant allocation to Afghanistan for 2017 through 2020 for $878 million. This will be announced in Brussels, which will ensure funds for infrastructure through ADB in the coming years. So we're committed to continuing our support for transport, energy, and agriculture, natural resource management. 2 other features define ADB's program in Afghanistan. First is our support for the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program, which involves 10 countries and a number of our multilateral partners, including the World Bank, the IMF, UNDP, Islamic Development Bank, and the European Bank. But in terms of CAREC, the focus is on transport, energy, and trade. So everything we do nationally in Afghanistan is based on the way we see the region. So we look for regional interconnections as much as possible in terms of our support for the infrastructure that we're providing. In addition, we administer something called the Afghanistan Infrastructure Trust Fund, which allows other development partners interested in providing support for infrastructure in Afghanistan who don't want to undertake these projects themselves to do so through ADB in collaboration with the government, which ensures that one, the projects are on budget, and two, that given the cost of these projects, they tend to be very large. Even small donors can contribute to a trust fund, which allows big things to happen. You asked what opportunities there are, and in terms of ADB's program in Afghanistan, Dan, and it's a tough question to answer because there are big opportunities and little opportunities, and they're all important. But I've felt since meeting former Minister Mohammadi, Minister of Mines in 2002, that the mining sector in Afghanistan is just has huge potential, and it's still waiting for serious investment. And I'm not sure it'll ever be tackled, in whole, that is through a single investment or through a single company, or, it's something that's going to have to be phased over time. And it's so much more than mines. I mean, you've got to get the power going, the roads, the railways, the people, the technical know-how, the foreign investors with domestic investors all coming together. And it's really a monumental challenge. And there are other infrastructure priorities that need doing too. I mean, the Salang bypass, for example, getting the TAPI project done. CASA 1000 is underway. There's the 2TAP project that ADB is working on that's making progress. All of them are mega projects. All are very expensive, and there's just going to have to be a lot of serious prioritization done in the coming years that will allow things like the mining sector to move ahead. The only other opportunity I see out there that I wish people could sort of get their heads around in a better way, which would help ADB, would be this nexus between development and development expenditure and security expenditures. I think there are a lot of synergies between the two, but they tend to be treated in isolation most of the time. I think the military is probably better at understanding what's happening on the development front and vice versa, but certainly there are lots of opportunities, I think, for what's happening on the security front to be better focused through a development lens, which would allow things like the mining sector, or pipelines, or regional transmission lines, or roads, and even for Afghanistan to emerge again as sort of an entrepot for trade and commerce throughout the sub-region. I'm an optimistic when it comes to these sorts of things, but I don't see a whole lot of things happening on the ground today.
Okay. So if I want to do something with the Asian Development Bank in Afghanistan, do I call Manila? Do I call you? Do I call Kabul?
Call Kabul, our country office there. Tom Pinella is our country director.
Okay.
Anyone that wants to call me is welcome to do so.
So if I have a solar panel project idea, I've got a water idea, and I want to get private financing from the private sector window at the Asian Development Bank, you guys can do things like that, right? You can lend money to companies and for project ideas, right?
Yeah, we've been involved in a number of pretty successful startups. Roshan was one. The Afghanistan International Bank was another. There are lots of opportunities for us to work with the private sector.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, all right, last up is Marc Schleifer, who's the Regional Director for South Asia for CIPE. Marc, over to you.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thank you to my fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be here at the U.S. Chamber today, and thanks to Jeff and the AACC. And if Mr. Wahidi could please share our congratulations with the ambassador and his family on the new addition. It's interesting here, obviously, to be batting cleanup with the World Bank and USAID and ADB. In my remarks, I'm actually going to bring it down to the local level and put the focus really on the small business side. So just a very quick word on what is CIPE. CIPE, the Center for International Private Enterprise, is a nonprofit affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we are primarily U.S. government funded. We're one of the 4 core institutes of something called the National Endowment for Democracy. And our focus and our mission really is to bring together the private sector side with the democracy side, and in a word that really boils down to the issue of governance. Our focus is to work on democratic development through the lens of private sector development, and work on private sector development through the lens of strengthening democratic institutions. And as Dan mentioned, it's for us, it's really about the rules of the road, the rules of the game, the rule of law. So that's what we're all about. We've been active in Afghanistan for over 10 years. We have an office staffed by Afghan local staff in Kabul. We've done a range of programs over those 10 years. We've built capacity and done training programs for business associations and chambers of commerce, including for women's business associations. We've done training programs on what is the market economy for provincial councilors. We've helped start small business and anti-corruption caucuses within the parliament. And this work has been funded in part, some by our core donor at the National Endowment for Democracy, and some thanks to the support of USAID in the past. One of the major things that we've done in recent years, starting in 2011, was something called the National Business Agenda. And this really is taking a tool that was originally pioneered by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here in the States, and we've, at CIPE, adapted for use around the world. This is you can think of it as a door knock advocacy document. It has 2 main stages. One is to poll the private sector and find out what their priorities for reform are, and then to take that document and present it to policymakers in a clear and transparent and open fashion, advocating for policy change in a participatory and open way. So, as you can see, we have 1 foot in the economic development side and 1 foot, as I said, in the democracy side. And we really are process-oriented. We're trying to make the economy more transparent and inclusive, and we're also trying to make the policy side, the advocacy side, more transparent and inclusive. Now, Tommaso talked a little bit about the World Bank's doing business rankings. How does what CIPE works on fit into that? Well, they look a lot, obviously, as we know, at what are the institutions, what are the regulations that govern the private sector. For CIPE, it's really all about implementation. So we pull together small businesses across the country, and we ask them actually how they are experiencing the changes and the reforms on a day-to-day level. And then we help them put those impressions into a clear format and present it to policymakers. We worked on the National Business Agenda starting in 2011. We helped put together a fairly robust document that was presented at the national level. And then as we saw the troop drawdown and certain reductions in foreign aid, we decided now's the time to take this out to the regional level. So we started working last year on something that we call provincial business agendas, or PBAs, which I'll talk about now in a bit more detail. The PBA process started with summit meetings in 2014 and 2015, bringing together local private sector leaders in Herat, Kandahar, Jalalabad, and Mazar Sharif to voice their concerns and talk about what challenges they face really on a daily doing business. And as I say, these are small business owners. We aim for gender balance, obviously, to the extent possible in these sessions. And over 400 people attended each PBA summit in each of those locations. Then there's a writing period where our staff helps those business leaders to formulate what their demands and expectations are in a clear fashion. And then we launch these PBAs, these provincial business agendas. They were launched in 2015 and 2016 with about 100 or 150 people at each event in each of the 4 cities, bringing together business leaders, policy leaders, elected officials. And then we form PBA advocacy task forces, which are now working on an ongoing basis to track implementation of the policy reforms that are demanded and to keep the pressure on, meeting with elected officials and policymakers and regional officials on a constant basis. So Dan asked us to talk about some sort of concrete asks or developments that we would look for in the next 3 to 5 years. Let me summarize just a few small points that are in the PBAs, some things that our partners think that are achievable demands that could be met within the next 3 to 5 years. Now, following some of the work that we did in 2011 on the National Business Agenda, on the NBA, there was a law passed that aimed to extend the period of validity of business licenses from 1 year to 3 years. And I think we heard actually from one of the speakers that we've seen some implementation in Kabul, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily translate down to the regional level. All of our PBA partners at the regional level have identified one simple step. The validity of licenses is not working at the regional level. Businesses, local small businesses, still have to extend their business licenses every single year. The law is on the books. The business license is supposed to be valid for 3 years. That's not working. This is obviously a source for corruption, and it's also a challenge for people doing business. Another point, industrial parks. Industrial parks have been built across the country, but in many places they have limited connectivity to the electricity grid. Again, all of the PBAs identified this one simple issue, and actually in the 6 to 9 months since these PBAs were launched, we've actually seen some progress on this front in Nangarhar and Balkh provinces. Another point that was raised, annual submission of balance statements to the Ministry of Finance when paying taxes. A lot of local businesses point out that the process is overly complex and overly time-consuming as they have to file their documents at the local level, and then those are sent to Kabul for processing. They'd like to see more regional-level capacity in terms of processing these balance statements. Another point on procurement issues. In Herat, the construction companies highlighted Article 82 of the Law on Procurement, which they say establishes lower price as the sole criteria for awarding contracts. They would like to see, in addition, the quality of the bid or the technical capacity of the bidder included in the list of requirements that is taken into consideration in awarding procurement contracts. In Nangarhar, the construction companies mentioned that the government takes a 5 to 10% guarantee from all bidders, and that money is then held until completion of the contract. Instead, they think that once the contract is awarded, the losing firms should get their guarantee money back. That would be a very simple step that could be taken. Another final point, a number of businesses mentioned that they'd like to see easing of the process for issuing full-year visas for skilled technical workers. In the short amount of time since we've launched these PBAs, we've already seen some signs of progress. As I mentioned, in some of these industrial parks, right? So in the Balkh Industrial Park, apparently since the time that this provincial business agenda was launched, 102 out of 116 factories already report that electricity is flowing. Before the process started, our advocacy process, only 14 factories said that electricity was connected. In Herat, the provincial director of the Revenue Collection Agency has agreed to resume the renewal of trade permits, which had been halted for some time. And at the national level, the head of the Industrialists Association has reported that the High Economic Council has approved a reduction in tariffs on imported raw materials from about 5% down to 1%. So advocacy works. We know that policy advocacy works. It works here in the US. It works in developed economies. CIPE is working to help show that it can work in Afghanistan as well. We have to bear in mind, obviously, that advocacy is an iterative process. It's not just about submitting your demands to policymakers. You also have to track implementation of those demands on a regular basis. But we're hopeful that our partners are moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much. I'm cognizant of the time, Jeff. Why don't I take 1 or 2 questions from the audience? Take 2 from the audience. There's a microphone over here. I know there are a lot of thoughtful, smart people, so if not, I've got plenty of questions myself. If everyone's shy, I'm not shy, so.
I'm going to go first.
So who wants to, Jeffrey, you want to ask something?
I'm going to go first because we had our business matchmaking conference last year, and President Ghani sent a small delegation of Afghan bankers to the conference. And their biggest frustration was that they can't get the U.S. multinational banks to give them a corresponding banking relationship. And they won't even identify for them what hurdles they need to overcome to establish that relationship. So Eleanor, I'm thinking about when I was looking at your slide, is there something either on the guarantee or on the relationship side that USAID and DCA could do to help spearhead that? I know it's Treasury's role, Treasury Department's role here to really help that process, but they haven't got any tread on that front at all. And I'm wondering, what can we do? Because getting capital into these banks and allowing them to have that corresponding banking relationship with larger banks, I think is part of this maturity that they need to get to. What's your feeling on that?
Sorry, Jeffrey, do you know if they've ever had one since 2002?
Yeah,
Was it cut
Kabul
off?
Bank did, but unfortunately that went away when Kabul Bank had the problem. So,
Okay.
the,
So it's something that's been lost and they're trying to get back.
yes, and they are achieving, they're doing much better, and that's a message that also hasn't gotten out, and Afghan International Bank's a good example of that. That's one of your partners, but just any ideas on that, or Craig, or anybody else?
Okay. Eleanor, do you want to?
Yeah, just a quick comment. So one thing I didn't talk about is that, of course, we don't see the credit guarantee as a cure-all. So in this case, for a correspondent banking relationship, I don't necessarily, off the top of my head, see a strong role for DCA to play. What we often do is we help get credit into the country. So we'll work at the wholesale level with an international bank to guarantee a loan to a local bank for that bank to on-lend within the country. But on a correspondent banking relationship, it would be not as obvious what role DCA would play.
Okay. Okay, others, please, my friend from USIPE, former World Bank staffer.
Yeah, I had a question about agriculture and promoting its growth. And given that most of the successful developing countries have actually, in the past, protected their agriculture, and many advanced countries continue to protect their agriculture, what would be the role of some kinds of export promotion grants or financial support for exports, and also moderate tariffs on imports to avoid this scenario that, there are apples from China, almonds from California. Many agriculture goods have been flooding the Afghan market. Thanks.
Right, so pomegranates, apples, almonds, all sorts of agriculture, and the AID's spent 10 or 12 years investing in agriculture. So question for the, can I'd welcome anybody to just respond to that. Craig, do you have a take on the agriculture sector? Eleanor, do you want to?
So I can just say quickly, our economic growth program is largely focused on the agriculture sector there. My colleague David Bailey, not to call you out, David, but maybe at the break we could talk about it more because I don't know to what extent we're supporting exporters specifically, but through DCA, something we do across the globe is promote loans to exporters for exactly that reason.
Anyone else want to take a crack on this issue of agriculture and agriculture exports? Any of you worked on this issue in Afghanistan? No? Okay.
I mean, somewhat. I mean, obviously we don't have very much time now, but we can chat later, and I can share with you some of the ideas that have come out of the local business communities on how to promote agriculture at the local level.
Okay. Sir.
Bill Jorn on the board of the AACC. This is for Mr. Steffensen with ADB. It seems to me that the TAPI project, the gas line project, could hold a lot of potential for businesses to engage in supporting the overall engineering, building, et cetera, of the TAPI pipeline. So where is that now as far as the planning stage and the implementation stage, and what measures will ADB take in order to ensure that Afghan businesses, and preferably in cooperation with some U.S. businesses, medium-sized businesses particularly, could play an important role in supporting the design and construction of the TAPI pipeline?
Believe it or not, a lot of progress has been achieved the past few years on TAPI. I know there was a groundbreaking ceremony involving the presidents of the 4 countries involved in TAPI a few months ago, and ADB is scaling up for its second round of assistance to TAPI Inc. To begin construction of the pipeline. There's quite a bit of information on our website nowadays because there's so much interest in the project, and I'd encourage you to take a look at what's there. And if you have specific questions related to the next round of technical assistance that ADB will be providing, send those to me and I'll get them to my colleagues in my headquarters. But I would like to state simply that for all the foreign investors interested in the project, there will be lots of domestic opportunities for contractors to be involved in construction of the pipeline. We're seeing that already in the case of roads and transmission lines and distribution systems that we're funding across the country. It's funny in a way because with sort of the downsizing of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers program in Afghanistan, you know, there are a lot of good contractors that were working with them that sort of lost out on some opportunities funded through ACE, which are now working with ADB, and they're doing awfully good work. So for our part, we're impressed with what we're seeing. We think there are more opportunities available to the local construction industry, and if you have specific questions, just let me know. I'd be happy to follow up with you.
All right, please join me in thanking the panel. I think we've got to end it here. I'm sorry about that. I think we should end it here. Thank you.